Hey everyone, welcome to the next edition of the Daily Bullet. I'm Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining us today, Brooke Cheney. She is with a Great Start Shooting School, and we may mention that later, but that's not really why we've got Brooke coming on today. Brooke, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So let's talk about Suicide Prevention Saturday. When I was suggested that I had you on, this is really the topic that was suggested. What is Suicide Prevention Saturday, and what do you have to do with it?
All right, so Suicide Prevention Saturday is something that I came up with randomly one Saturday night. And we'd been going through some stuff in our family, and it was one of those things where nobody wants to talk about suicide. So I hopped on Facebook and I'm just like, okay, hi, my name's Brooke Cheney from Great Start Shooting School. Why do gun owners care about firearm suicides? Because two out of every three deaths that they say is firearms violence is actually a suicide. And I started that like 3 years ago now, not knowing if I would even do it for a second week.
Wow. So in
So
3 years, you obviously you've got 150 of these at least. We had 52 Saturdays a year. That's a lot of going out in the public. How's it been received?
So it's interesting because I'm not very consistent in that sometimes we have Suicide Prevention Saturday on a Sunday because life does not go according to plan. And I think in the 3 years I've missed two or three Saturdays, and most of them honestly have been this year because this year's been really hard. But people people's feedback is actually what keeps me going because someone's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad there's someone that I can talk to." For example, just this past week, I don't know when this is going to air, but last week was Christmas. And Christmas Eve morning, I got a Facebook message saying, "Hey, one of my friends just committed suicide this morning. How do you deal with it?"
Oh, wow.
So the fact that I'm able to reach out to people and people know that they can reach out to me and ask questions like that, I would say that's a good way to measure my success.
Absolutely. Now I am coming at this from I'm not a counselor. I've got no training in mental health. I'm just an old bald white guy that used to drive truck for a living. So some of these questions may be out of scope. Please let me know and if I'm off base in my questions. Please feel free to let me know that as well. From what I've heard in the past, and this is far in the past, suicide breeds suicide. So if you get a message like, "Hey, my friend just committed suicide," that's got to be like all hands on deck. This is something that needs to be taken care of right now, right?
Yes, it's challenging because people don't want to talk about it. When someone dies because of suicide, you go to the funeral and nobody says cause of death. They're just like, "Yeah, he's dead," because nobody wants to talk about it. Like I said, Suicide Prevention Saturday is just letting people know that there's resources. Because on different Saturdays, I'll try to touch on different resources. It's always random conversations that I have with people. Sometimes I tell them, how to get out of depression. Sometimes I suggest on different ways on how to talk to people that they're afraid of. Because one of the many themes out there is just ask. If you're worried
Mm-hmm.
about anybody, just ask. The other part is just call random people. Because a lot of times, think about like someone like Robin Williams, someone who you think has everything going for them, and yet they fell to suicide. And people are like, "But I don't understand. They had everything together. They're a great family man. They're successful, all of that." And suicide has no boundaries. It's not age or gender or social status or income. It's just a mental challenge that you have. And I'll let you know is that as a teenager, I was suicidal. And this is another reason I talk about it because I too am not a counselor in any way, shape, or form. I've been through therapy because that is what I had to do. But when I was 18 years old, I did not know having a plan. on how to kill myself was not normal, because at that time that was my normal.
Wow. So you've mentioned a lot of different resources that someone can draw on. Would you mind mentioning just a few if somebody is feeling like they'd like to harm themselves? What are a few resources you can point them towards?
So I'm here in Connecticut, and off the top of my head, when you call 211, you can get information on lots of things. And one of the things, if you listen to you have to listen to the prompts on the phone, but it will get you so you can actually talk to someone right away. There is super easy ways. You go on Google and do suicide prevention, and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline will come up. President Trump actually just signed through another bill, I want to say October or so of this past year. And it is a national suicide bill. It hasn't been funded yet, but it'll have the same number no matter where you are in America. So yeah, and behind me, I keep forgetting, I have a Brave Conversation, which is from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. And for anyone who's a business like mine's a Great Start Shooting School.
Mm-hmm.
But if you own a business and you're a member of NSSF, they will give you the resources for free. It talks about having a brave conversation. What do you do when you find out that someone may or may not be suicidal? How to store the guns, or ways to go about that sort of thing.
Sure. Now, in firearms owners, let's just talking plain facts. There's lots of ways to commit suicide, but not all of them are going to be as successful as using a gun. Using a gun can be extremely efficient, and there are people that live through a suicide attempt by firearm, but they are far more successful than hanging or other forms where you can, in the middle of it, change your mind and stop. I think it's very important that there are people in the firearms community that are working towards suicide prevention, because that's one of the places where the anti-rights crowd is pushing for elimination of firearms because of suicide. Would you like to expand on that, or?
Yeah. So one of the things, as you know, I'm part of the DC project as well. I'm the state leader here in Connecticut, and I go to DC. But even before that, when I started testifying here in Hartford, Connecticut, regarding gun bills, like my first bill was the 10-round mag ban.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges the anti-gun people have, in my opinion, is they're trying to legislate a thing versus an action. And my thought on suicide prevention is simply this: if we actually took all that time and money that Moms Demand Action and Bloomberg and all those guys spend on anti-gun rhetoric, and instead were pushing mental health awareness and suicide prevention, we could save so many more lives, because 2 out of every 3 gun deaths is a suicide. However, if all of us got together and actually focused on suicide prevention, we could also help prevent all those other types of suicides. And that's kind of where the educate versus legislate thing comes in from the DC project, is that the more education there is and the more studying that I've done, because I'm in Connecticut, Sandy Hook ripped my heart right out of my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where I studied prevention, and whether it's suicide prevention or violence prevention, the real answer is you can't legislate that stuff away.
Now, this could be a stupid question, and again, feel free. I'm not the smartest person in the world. Feel free to tell me this is silly. But in the statistics you just said, two of three suicides are firearm suicides. Does that statistic include what is becoming very common anymore, and that's suicide by cop? Or is
So I misspoke, actually.
okay?
Because I apologize, 2 out of every 3 gun deaths are a suicide. I
Okay.
actually don't have the stats on how people commit suicide. So yeah,
Okay.
I actually misspoke. I do know that it's primarily in the veteran suicide, sorry, there's lots of different resources out there, but veteran suicide is 22 or 21 a day, for example, and firearm suicide is primarily men.
Yes.
So that's why, to me, educating the prevention of all types of suicide just impacts such a huge amount of people.
And the veteran suicide, I think that's an absolute. Any suicide is a tragedy. Let me start by saying that. However, veterans that have signed up and served our country and quite often go into horrific situations. Thank goodness, not so many in the past several years, but they come back and they have a horrific time adjusting. It doesn't seem that they're getting the help they need from the military, and then we end up with these tragedies. I'm, I don't know that there's a way other than just through civilians such as yourself to impact veteran suicide.
It is a huge problem, and it's not even whether or not the Army can or the military can or cannot help these people. The stigma that is around getting help. And that's a societal problem. That's why it can't be legislated. It's you and me talking about this, then someone else hearing this and being willing to talk about it with their friends and family. I actually just heard, again, we're in the holiday season, and someone's like, yeah, someone was all insulted because they said that everybody should have counseling. And the person thought that that was absolutely horrible, that they would suggest that they needed counseling. And I will tell you, my personal opinion is absolutely everybody needs counseling at some level. And if you've ever been to a good counselor, you'll understand why. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that a lot of people have gone to bad counselors and didn't give a second one a chance. So that would be another piece of advice I'd offer is if you go to counseling and it was horrible, just go try another counselor because they're not all the same. And you just like a high firearm, right? You want to find the right fit for you.
Oh, absolutely. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and that is that in firearms ownership, there's especially a stigma for counseling because I think a lot of people, and myself included, are afraid of getting the mental illness tag and then losing their Second Amendment freedoms. And that's
Absolutely.
I don't know that there's a cure for that, but I know that is one of the issues why gun owners quite often don't go to counseling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give you an example, my personal history is I actually applied for life insurance. And what happened was they were denying me and they were denying me and and they wouldn't tell me why. And finally I'm like, "What?" They're like, "You omitted information from your application." And I'm like, "What did I omit?" And it was they finally would tell me, and it was that I went to my doctor and I asked for a referral for a psychologist to deal with grief because my grandmother had just died. And they thought that I was lying about getting mental health. So it's not even just firearms owner. It's like across the board, you're not allowed to have counseling on your resume. And it's a societal problem. Maybe that is something that you could legislate away a little bit. You know, it's like it's not shouldn't be across the board that mental health disqualifies you from things.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
yeah, it's a long
honestly
road.
it's a I don't mean to blame Hollywood, but I think a lot of the problem lies there. A lot of the entertainment that we're getting, if there's any mental health issues at all, they are so far out there that by the time somebody sees a psychiatrist, that it's Hannibal Lecter time, you know. We are
Yeah.
coming
And
really quickly up on the time we have available for today, and we didn't even mention your company, a Great Start Shooting School. Do you want to take just a minute or two to tell people about that, and then tell people where they can find Suicide Prevention Saturdays?
all right, so a Great Start Shooting School just started because I wanted to be safe and comfortable around firearms. And I was never into self defense actually, but I needed somewhere to get started. And once I got started and I got confident, I opened my school so other people would have a place to get confident. And what was the other thing you said you wanted me to say? Where to find me for Suicide
Where
Prevention Saturdays?
yeah, where can somebody, if they're interested in Suicide Prevention Saturday, where can they find that?
All right, so I have a little bit put up on my YouTube channel, A Great Start Shooting School YouTube channel. There's a couple of them there, but for the most part, they're on my personal profile, Brooke Cheney, on Facebook, and they're open to the public, and anyone can find them.
Very cool. Well, we are totally out of time. Brooke, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, if you would please subscribe to the channel, and when you do, hit that notification bell so you know when we release another video, which we will be doing tomorrow. Thanks for watching.